The millionaire had money, power, and no love. Virgin in body and soul, he lived imprisoned by fear. She agreed to marry him for a promise of pleasure, not knowing she would awaken the man who slept inside him. New York had always been a city of contrasts. Skyscrapers that touched the grey sky, wide avenues where traffic pulsed like blood in the veins of an sleepless giant, and people who walked in a hurry, each carrying their own secret worlds. In the financial heart of this metropolis, between mirrored glass and boardrooms where fortunes were born and died in minutes, there was a name that everyone knew, but few dared to utter without a mixture of respect and fear. Gabriel James Vaughanwood. At 30, Gabriel was the most powerful businessman in the country, heir to an empire that began 3 generations earlier. When his great-grandfather built the first textile mill upstate, he had transformed that legacy into something much larger. Today, the Vaughanwood Group controlled investments in technology, energy, infrastructure, and the financial market. The company's stocks moved the market. His decisions impacted thousands of jobs. His presence at high society events was anticipated like the arrival of a king. But no one, absolutely no one, knew the emptiness that dwelled behind those chilling, unsettling blue eyes. Gabriel was described by magazines as inaccessible, brilliant, methodical. The elite women sighed when he passed, but they knew that any attempt to get close would be futile. He didn't flirt, he didn't smile, he didn't dance, he didn't touch. It was as if he existed within an invisible dome, made of ice and discipline, where no human warmth could penetrate. What these people didn't know was that this distance wasn't a choice. It was survival. Gabriel's childhood had been a succession of grey, cold days, even when the sun shone brightly over the family's estate in the Hamptons. His grandfather, Henry Vaughanwood, a feared and revered patriarch, believed that emotions were signs of weakness, cried when he fell and scraped his knee at 5, punishment, got teary-eyed when the governess who raised him was fired without warning, a lecture on emotional control, asked for a hug after a nightmare, a glacial silence, and an order to go back to his room. Gabriel's father, Marshall Vaughanwood, followed the same model. A distant man, always too busy to be present, he saw his son as a long-term investment that needed to be molded with rigor. His mother, Helen, had tried to offer some affection in the early years, but was gradually silenced by family pressure. She ended up becoming a decorative figure, always impeccable at social events, but emotionally absent at home. Gabriel grew up amidst spreadsheets, targets, speeches about excellence, and impossible expectations. At 10, he was already participating in strategic meetings. At 15, he was managing minor projects under strict supervision. At 20, he had taken over as the group's vice president. When his father passed the torch for good at 25, Gabriel was already completely trained, not to live, but to perform, and he performed masterfully. His meetings were legendary for their brutal efficiency. He would enter, analyze numbers, make decisions, and leave. There was no room for hesitation, doubt, or side conversations. Employees feared him, business partners respected him, competitors hated him, but everyone recognized Gabriel Vaughanwood was unbeatable. The problem was that behind this flawless mask there was a man who had never touched a woman, not out of moral or religious choice, but because he simply didn't know how. His body had been trained to sit upright, to shake hands with calculated firmness, to wear tailored suits that hid any trace of vulnerability. But it had never been taught about desire, about intimacy, about the fragile and terrifying beauty of surrendering to another person. At 30, Gabriel had never truly kissed anyone. He had never felt another person's skin against his. He had never allowed anyone to see beyond the polished surface he presented to the world. And it didn't bother him, or at least he believed it didn't. Until Henry Vaughanwood, now 82 but still lucid and controlling, called an urgent family meeting. It was an October afternoon, and Gabriel was in his 23rd floor office, reviewing contracts for $1 billion merger, when his secretary announced that his grandfather wanted to see him immediately at the family mansion. The tone was unusual. Henry rarely called meetings outside of business hours. Something important was happening. Gabriel drove his German sedan through the congested streets of New York until he reached the Upper East Side, where the Vaughnwood mansion occupied an entire block. Wrought iron gates opened automatically. Perfectly symmetrical gardens flanked the path to the main entrance. Everything there breathed order, control, tradition. Inside the mahogany-paneled library, Henry was waiting for him, seated in his leather armchair, with an untouched glass of whiskey beside him. The patriarch had completely white hair, a still relatively straight back, and eyes that seemed to see right through people. Beside him, Gabriel's father. Marshall stood with a tense expression. "Gabriel, let me get straight to the point," Henry began without preamble. "You're 30 years old, single, and show no interest whatsoever in starting a family. This needs to change." Gabriel remained impassive, as always. "I understand your concern, but my personal life doesn't interfere with the company's results." "This isn't just about results," the grandfather retorted coldly. "It's about legacy, continuity, image. The press has already started speculating about your private life. There are ridiculous rumors circulating. We need an heir. We need you to get married." A heavy silence filled the room. Gabriel took a deep breath. He was used to negotiating contracts, but this was different. This was his life being treated as just another corporate asset to be managed. "And what exactly are you proposing?" Gabriel asked in a controlled voice. Henry leaned forward slightly. "You have 6 months to find a suitable wife, someone from a good family with a clean reputation, who understands her role and accepts the conditions. I'm not asking for love, I'm asking for responsibility." Marshall, silent until then, added, "We've already identified some potential candidates. Daughters of allied businessmen, heiresses of traditional families. We can facilitate discreet introductions." Gabriel felt something strange stir inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something more subtle, deeper. A sense that his life was once again being decided without him having a say. But as always, he maintained his composure. "I'll consider it," he said simply. "There's nothing to consider," Henry cut in firmly. "You have 6 months. Either you marry of your own accord, or I will arrange the marriage myself. And it won't just be a social agreement. I want concrete results. I want an heir within 2 years. Gabriel left that meeting, feeling as if the walls around him had closed in even tighter. Back at his apartment in Soho, a minimalist space decorated in shades of grey and white, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood before the panoramic window, watching the city lights blink like fallen stars. Why did this bother him so much? He had always known this day would come. Marriage, an heir, continuity. It was part of the script. But for the first time, Gabriel wondered if there was anything more beyond that cold script his family had followed for generations. In the following days, he tried to focus on work, but the pressure mounted. His mother, Helen, began sending subtle messages about social events where he could meet suitable young women. Marshall scheduled dinners with allied families. Henry demanded weekly progress reports, until Gabriel made a surprising decision. Instead of passively accepting the candidates chosen by his family, he called Robert Taylor, his trusted lawyer, and gave him a clear instruction. "I want you to draft a marriage contract, complete, detailed, with no loopholes." Robert, a 50-year-old man with decades of experience dealing with the elite, frowned. "A prenuptial agreement?" "More than that," Gabriel explained. "I want a contract that defines all the terms of the marriage, expectations, obligations, boundaries, division of assets, behavior clauses. I want it to be absolutely clear that this marriage is a transaction. Nothing more." Robert hesitated. "Gabriel, this is unusual. A marriage isn't exactly a corporate merger." "It should be," Gabriel replied coldly. "Emotions complicate everything. Unmet expectations destroy relationships. If I'm going to marry out of obligation, let it be transparent and functional." And so in the following weeks a 43-page document was born, meticulously drafted, covering everything from the frequency of public appearances together to the conditions for the conception of an heir. The contract was cold, technical, almost inhuman, but to Gabriel it made perfect sense. The problem was finding someone who would accept it. The first attempts were disastrous. Robert presented the document to 3 different candidates, all daughters of traditional families. The first read the first 3 pages and left in outrage. The second laughed, thinking it was a tasteless joke. The third considered it, but when she reached the more specific clauses about physical intimacy, she backed out, embarrassed. Gabriel was unfazed. To him, this only confirmed that he was on the right path. If the women rejected the contract, it was because they weren't suitable for what he needed. He didn't want romance. He didn't want passion. He wanted efficiency. But time was running out. 3 months had passed since the meeting with Henry, and Gabriel was still single. The family pressure was increasing. His mother made increasingly direct comments. His father demanded results, and his grandfather, ever watchful, was beginning to lose his patience. It was then that Robert had a different idea. "Gabriel," he said during an executive lunch at Daniel, "perhaps we're looking in the wrong place." "What do you mean?" Gabriel asked, methodically cutting a piece of salmon. "All the candidates we've presented so far are elite women who don't need money, who don't need financial security. For them, the contract is offensive because it seems too transactional. But what if we look for someone for whom this transaction makes sense, someone who is in a difficult situation, who needs help, who sees this agreement as an opportunity?" Gabriel paused, reflecting. It was a pragmatic approach, but at the same time there was something about it that bothered him. Wouldn't it be even colder, more calculating, on the other hand, he thought, at least it would be honest. It would be an agreement where both parties know exactly what they are doing. No illusions, no false promises. "Continue," Gabriel said. Robert went on. "I know of a few cases, families that have gone through financial difficulties, young people with high student debt, people in complicated situations who could benefit from such an arrangement. Obviously, I need to investigate carefully, ensure they are people of integrity, with no past scandals. But I think we can find someone willing to accept the terms." Gabriel was silent for a few seconds, analyzing all the variables. Finally, he nodded. "Do it, but be discreet. And only bring me candidates who truly understand and accept all the terms. I don't want any surprises." Robert agreed and, in the following weeks, began a quiet investigation. He spoke with fellow lawyers, consulted social workers, researched public records. He was looking for someone specific, a young woman of integrity with no addictions or scandals, who was in a financial situation difficult enough to consider an unusual agreement. And that's how he found Caroline Miller. Caroline was 23 and lived in a small apartment in Queens. The only daughter of Martha Miller, a retired teacher battling a degenerative disease, Caroline worked during the day as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm and studied engineering at night at a private college. Her grades were excellent, her record impeccable. But her financial situation was desperate. Her mother's treatments consumed almost her entire salary. There were accumulated credit card debts, late rent payments, utility bills always on the edge. Caroline lived in a constant state of financial suffocation, juggling to keep everything afloat, but knowing that at any moment the house of cards could collapse. Robert learned about her through a social worker at the hospital where Martha was being treated. He arranged a discreet meeting in a neutral coffee shop, far from both Caroline's neighborhood and the business district. Caroline arrived on time, wearing simple jeans and a white blouse. She was pretty in a natural and unpretentious way, brown hair tied back in a ponytail, honey-colored eyes that reflected exhaustion but also determination. There was a quiet dignity about her, a strength that came from someone who survives every day against all odds. "Good morning, Caroline. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Robert began. "Good morning," she replied, a little tense. "I won't lie, I was curious. The social worker said you had a proposal for me, but she didn't give any details." Robert took a deep breath. This wouldn't be easy. "Caroline, I'll be direct with you. I represent a very important client, a high-level businessman who needs to get married for family and business reasons. He is not looking for love. He is looking for an agreement." Caroline frowned. "An agreement?" "Yes. A formal marriage, but based on a clear contract where both parties know exactly what to expect. My client would offer significant financial compensation." Cover all your expenses, including your mother's treatments and at the end of the stipulated period, a considerable sum. In return, you would fulfill certain social duties as his wife, appear at public events, maintain a proper image. Caroline was silent, processing it. It seemed surreal, like something out of a movie, but at the same time, there was something in Robert's seriousness that made it clear this was real. "How long are we talking about?" she asked cautiously. "Initially 2 years with the possibility of renegotiation, but all the terms would be in the contract." "And the compensation?" Robert mentioned a figure that made Caroline's eyes widen. It was more money than she would earn in 10 years of work. It was the difference between surviving and truly living. It was the possibility of saving her mother, finishing college without debt, having a future. But Caroline was not naive. There was something there that wasn't being said. Why me? Why not an elite woman, someone from his own social class? Robert was honest. Because the elite women did not accept the contract, they found it offensive. But my client believes that you, given your situation, might see this as an opportunity. I'm not saying you should accept, I'm just presenting the proposal. Caroline felt a mix of emotions. There was indignation, yes. The idea of being chosen out of financial desperation was humiliating, but at the same time there was pragmatism. She was fighting a battle she knew she was losing. The doctors had been clear. Without proper treatment, her mother had 2 years at most. With the treatment, she could gain a decade, maybe more. "Can I see the contract?" she asked. Robert handed her the document. Caroline spent the next 2 hours reading. Every page, every clause, every term. It was meticulous, cold, almost clinical, but it was also clear. There were no tricks, no fine print hiding traps. When she reached the section on physical intimacy, she felt her face flush. It was all there, described in an almost scientific manner. The expectation of producing an heir, the conditions, the limits. It was embarrassing, but at least it was transparent. "Who is he?" Caroline asked when she finished reading. Robert hesitated. "If you agree to proceed, I will arrange a meeting, but first I need to know, are you seriously considering this?" Caroline looked him in the eye. "I need to talk to my mother, and I need to think. Give me 3 days." Robert agreed. 3 days. "But Caroline, one last thing. This must be kept in absolute secrecy. If you accept, there will be a non-disclosure agreement. If you refuse as well, this matter cannot leak." Caroline nodded. "I understand." That night, back in the cramped apartment she shared with her mother, Caroline couldn't stop thinking. Martha was sleeping in the next room, frail and tired. The disease was progressing slowly, stealing her strength, stealing her time. Caroline opened the document Robert had allowed her to take and reread it several times. There was a way out that would require sacrifices, that would completely change her life, but that could also save the person she loved most in the world. The next day, she talked to Martha. She was honest, told her everything. Her mother listened in silence, with that quiet wisdom of someone who has lived a long time and understands the complexities of life. "Honey," Martha said in a weak voice, "you don't have to do this for me. I've lived my life. I've been happy. I don't want you to sacrifice your life, your chance to find real love because of my illness." Caroline held her mother's hand. "Mom, I know that. But I also know that if I do nothing, I'll lose you. And I'm not ready for that. Not now. Not when there's a chance." Martha sighed. "And what about love, Caroline? What about your life? You're so young." "I can have love later, Mum. The contract is for 2 years. Afterwards, I'll be free. And I'll have the financial means to start over however I want. But if I lose you, now there's no starting over that will bring you back." They were silent for a long time, just holding each other's hands. Finally, Martha nodded. "If this is what you want to do, I support you. But promise me one thing." "What, Mum?" "Don't lose yourself in this process. Don't let this turn you into someone bitter. Even if it's an agreement, try to find some dignity, some humanity in it," Caroline promised. And 3 days later, she called Robert. "I agree to meet him." The meeting was set for a Thursday evening, at a discreet restaurant in the Jardins neighborhood. It wasn't an ostentatious place, but rather a refined one, the kind of establishment the elite frequented when they wanted privacy. Robert had chosen a private room in the back, away from prying eyes. Caroline spent hours preparing. She didn't have suitable clothes for that kind of occasion, so she borrowed a simple but elegant black dress from a co-worker. She put her hair up in a low bun, applied discreet makeup. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone else, older, more sophisticated, more distant from who she really was. Martha, sitting on the bed, watched her daughter with teary eyes. "You look beautiful, honey." Caroline forced a smile. "I'm nervous." "That's natural, but remember, you owe him nothing. If at any moment you feel this isn't what you want, you can get up and leave. Do you hear me?" Caroline nodded, but inside she knew it wasn't that simple. She had already made her decision. She needed that money. She needed to save her mother. And if that meant marrying a stranger for 2 years, so be it. The driver Robert sent arrived promptly at 7 o'clock. It was a discreet car, but Caroline could tell from the details that it was very expensive. The interior smelled of new leather. The seat was soft, comfortable. Everything about it breathed a world she only knew from a distance. During the drive, she mentally rehearsed what she would say. She tried to imagine what this man would be like. Robert hadn't given many details, only that he was a businessman, 30 years old, serious and direct. But what did that really mean? Would he be arrogant, cruel, indifferent? When she arrived at the restaurant, Robert was waiting for her at the entrance. He greeted her with formal politeness and led her to the private room. "Caroline, I want you to know that you can leave at any time if you don't feel comfortable. This meeting is just for you to get to know each other. There is no obligation." She thanked him with a nod and went inside. Gabriel was standing with his back to the door, looking out the window at a small inner garden. When he heard the door open, he turned around. The first impact was visual. Gabriel was exactly as Caroline had imagined, and yet completely different. Tall, probably 6'1", broad shoulders under a perfectly tailored suit, dark hair combed back, a defined jawline, and eyes of an almost transparent blue that seemed to see beyond the surface. He was handsome in an almost unreal way, as if he had stepped out of a magazine, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness, a distance, as if he were there physically, but absent in every other sense. "Good evening," he said in a controlled voice, without emotional inflection. "You must be Caroline." "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're Gabriel." He nodded and indicated a chair. "Please sit down." They sat at the table facing each other. A discreet waiter brought water, wine, a menu. Gabriel dismissed it all with a polite but firm gesture. "We won't be long. Just water, please." Caroline felt a knot in her stomach. This was starting off even colder than she had imagined. Gabriel got straight to the point. "Robert informed me that you've read the contract and are considering accepting the proposal. Is that correct?" "Yes," Caroline replied. "And you fully understand the terms, the expectations, the obligations of both parties?" "I understand." Gabriel observed her for a few seconds, as if he were evaluating a business asset. "Then I need to ask you a few questions. They are personal but necessary." Caroline nodded, mentally preparing herself. "Do you have a boyfriend? Anyone with whom you have an intimate relationship?" "No." "Have you ever?" "Yes, 2 years ago. We broke up because he couldn't handle the financial pressure of my family situation." Gabriel made a mental note of the information. "Are you doing this just for the money?" Caroline hesitated. She could lie, say there were other reasons. But something about the direct coldness of this man demanded honesty. "Yes, I'm doing it for the money. My mother needs treatment. I need to finish college. I can't do it alone." Gabriel nodded as if that answer was exactly what he expected. "Good. I prefer honesty to false pretenses." "Now it's my turn to ask questions," Caroline said, gathering her courage. Gabriel looked at her with surprise. Few people dared to interrupt him. "Go on." "Why a contract? Why not a normal marriage?" Because normal marriages are based on emotional expectations that are often not met. This leads to frustration, conflict, traumatic divorces. I prefer clarity to illusions. Caroline absorbed that. There was a cold logic to that answer, but also something deeply sad. And you never wanted to have a real marriage. With love? Gabriel was silent for a few seconds. When he answered, his voice was even more controlled, as if he were holding something back. Love is a variable I don't know how to manage. I prefer to work with what I know. Caroline felt something stir inside her. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was recognition. Recognition that this man, with all his wealth and power, was profoundly lonely. And what about the intimacy part? She asked, feeling her face flush. In the contract, it says you expect an heir. How exactly would that happen? Gabriel maintained an impassive expression, but Caroline noticed a slight tensing of his jaw. It would be done respectfully. With your consent, I don't expect it to be pleasurable for either of us, just functional. Functional. The word echoed in Caroline's mind, as if they were talking about a bank transaction and not two bodies coming together. Have you ever had intimate relationships? She asked, daring to go deeper. Gabriel stared at her. I don't think that's relevant to the agreement. I think it is, Caroline insisted with a courage that surprised her. If we're going to do this, I need to know who I'm dealing with. A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Gabriel answered, each word measured. No, I never have. Caroline blinked, surprised. Never. Never. But you're 30. I know how old I am. And you never wanted to. Gabriel looked away for the first time. It's not a matter of wanting. It's a matter of not knowing how. That changed something in the way Caroline saw this man. He wasn't just cold, he was inexperienced, vulnerable in a way he probably didn't even recognize himself. If I accept, she said slowly, I need you to understand something. I'm not a machine. I can't just turn off my emotions. I can try to be professional, but I'm human. Gabriel looked back at her. I understand that, and I don't expect you to turn off your emotions, just that you don't expect me to reciprocate them. Caroline nodded. Fair enough. They were silent for a few minutes, each absorbing the weight of that surreal conversation. Finally, Gabriel picked up a folder that was next to his chair and placed it on the table. Here is an updated copy of the contract. I read the first version, but this one is more detailed. If you accept, I want you to read it carefully, consult an independent lawyer, ask all your questions. I don't want you to sign something you don't fully understand. Caroline took the folder. How much time do I have? 1 week. After that, I need a final answer. And if I accept, when would the wedding be? As soon as possible. My family is pressuring me, ideally within a month. Caroline felt her heart race. 1 month. In 1 month, her life could change completely. One last thing, Gabriel said. If at any point during these 2 years you want to leave, you can. There will be a termination clause. You will not be trapped in this against your will. And the compensation? If I leave before the 2 years, it will be proportional to the time served, but the costs of your mother's treatment will continue to be covered until she no longer needs it, regardless of how long you stay. Caroline looked at him with surprise. Why? Why guarantee that? Because I don't want you to stay just for the money. I want you to stay because you choose to stay. And if your mother's health is guaranteed, you will have the real freedom to make that choice. It was the first genuinely generous thing Gabriel had said all night. And paradoxically, it was what made Caroline believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something human behind that icy facade. I'll read the contract, she said, and I'll give you my answer in a week. Gabriel nodded and stood up. The driver will take you back home. They said their goodbyes formally, without a handshake, without a touch. Caroline left that restaurant feeling like she had just negotiated something much bigger than a contract. She felt like she had just looked into the soul of someone deeply wounded. In the following days, Caroline immersed herself in the contract. She read every page, every clause, every term. She consulted a lawyer a college professor recommended. He analyzed everything carefully and gave his opinion. The contract was solid, fair in legal terms, and protected both parties. There were no hidden traps. But the lawyer also warned her, "Caroline, legally, everything is in order. But emotionally? This kind of arrangement can be very difficult. Are you sure you want to do this?" Caroline thought of her mother, weaker every day. She thought of the accumulated bills. She thought of the future she could have if she accepted. "I'm sure." On the 6th day, she called Robert. "I accept." The reaction was immediate. Robert arranged a formal meeting for the signing of the contract. It would be at the law firm, with witnesses, everything registered and documented. When Caroline arrived at the office in the heart of Park Avenue, she felt completely out of place. The building was all mirrored glass. The lobby had a triple-height ceiling. Everything was luxurious and intimidating. She was wearing her best clothes, but she still felt out of place. Robert received her politely and led her to a meeting room. Gabriel was already there, sitting at the head of the table with his usual upright posture. He greeted her with a nod. "Good morning, Caroline." "Good morning, Gabriel." Robert began by explaining each section of the contract again, ensuring they both fully understood the terms. There were clauses about the division of assets, public appearances, domestic routine, privacy. It was all there in black and white. When they reached the section on physical intimacy, Caroline felt her face flush again. Robert read it aloud, with the same professional neutrality he used for any other legal term. Both parties agree that physical intimacy will be consensual, respectful, and aimed at the objective of conceiving an heir. There will be no obligation beyond what is agreed. Both parties may request pauses or adjustments as necessary. Gabriel remained impassive throughout the reading. Caroline tried to do the same, but she could feel her heart pounding. Finally, it was time to sign. Robert placed the document in front of Caroline. "If you sign this, you will be legally bound by the terms, are you sure?" Caroline looked at Gabriel. He was watching her with those cold blue eyes, without pressure, without expectation. Just waiting. She took the pen and signed. Gabriel did the same. And so, with 2 signatures and an official stamp, Caroline Miller and Gabriel James Vaughanwood became engaged. The news was carefully managed. The Vaughanwood family wanted a public announcement, but a discreet one. Robert drafted an official statement informing that Gabriel Vaughanwood, CEO of the Vaughanwood Group, was engaged to Caroline Miller, an engineering student. The ceremony would be intimate for close family and friends only. The press, of course, went wild. Gabriel was one of the most enigmatic and coveted figures in the country. The fact that he was marrying a stranger, with no background in the elite, generated endless speculation. Who was this Caroline? How did they meet? Was it true love or a family arrangement? Caroline suddenly found herself at the center of a media storm. There were photographers at her door, journalists trying to interview her, gossip bloggers investigating her past. It was terrifying. Gabriel, realizing the problem, acted quickly. He arranged for security for Caroline and her mother, moved them to a safer and more discreet apartment, and instructed his public relations team to control the narrative. Their first public appearance together was carefully planned. It would be at a charity gala dinner, a traditional event for the New York elite that took place every year. Gabriel wanted society's first contact with them as a couple to be controlled, formal, with no room for scandal. Caroline was terrified. Robert hired an image consultant to prepare her. There were days of training on etiquette, posture, how to eye, converse at social events, how to deal with the press. They bought a designer dress, expensive shoes, borrowed jewelry. When Caroline looked in the mirror on the day of the event, she saw a stranger looking back. The driver picked Caroline up from the new apartment and took her to Gabriel's penthouse. He was waiting for her in the living room, already dressed in a tuxedo. When he saw her, he had an almost imperceptible reaction. His eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than usual. "You look appropriate," he said. "Appropriate, not beautiful, not pretty. Appropriate." Caroline swallowed her disappointment and nodded. "Thank you." They went to the event together in a car with tinted windows. During the drive, Gabriel gave final instructions. "We'll enter together. I'll hold your arm. We'll smile discreetly for the photos. Don't answer questions from journalists, leave it to me. And what exactly do you expect me to do during the evening? Caroline asked with a touch of irony. Stay by my side. Be polite to the people I introduce you to. Don't drink too much, and if anyone asks about us, just say we met through mutual friends and it was something natural. Natural, nothing about this was natural. When they arrived at the hotel where the event was being held, there was a crowd of photographers. Gabriel got out first, went around the car, and opened the door for Caroline. She got out with the grace the consultant had taught her, took his arm and walked beside him down the red carpet. The flashes were blinding. The questions shouted by the journalists were deafening. Gabriel, what's your fiancé like? Caroline, how did you meet? Is it love at first sight? Do you have a wedding date yet? Gabriel ignored it all with an ease that came from years of practice. Caroline tried to do the same, but she felt her legs trembling. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was different, luxurious but restrained. Live classical music, tables decorated with imported flowers, people dressed in clothes that cost more than Caroline earned in a year. Gabriel guided her among the guests, introducing her with cold formality. This is Caroline, my fiancée. Caroline, this is so-and-so, president of such-and-such company. Caroline, this is so-and-so, director of such-and-such foundation. Caroline smiled, shook hands, murmured polite greetings, but she felt like an imposter. These people looked at her with poorly disguised curiosity, sizing her up, judging her. She could see the questions in their eyes. Who is this girl? Where did she come from? What did she do to win over Gabriel Vaughanwood? During dinner, Caroline sat next to Gabriel at the main table. He talked with the nearby guests about business, the financial market, economic policy. Caroline tried to follow along, but she was completely lost. This was not her world. During a pause, a woman sitting across the table, a socialite in her 50s covered in jewels, looked directly at Caroline. So, dear, tell me, how did you manage to win over our Gabriel? He's so reserved, it must have been a fascinating story. There was venom in that voice. Caroline recognized it immediately. Before she could answer, Gabriel intervened in his cold voice. It was something natural, Beatrice. There's not much to tell. Beatrice smiled, but it was a sharp smile. How romantic. And tell me, Caroline, do you work? Study? I study engineering, Caroline replied, lifting her chin, and I work during the day to pay for my studies. There was a brief silence. That was almost heresy, in this environment where elite women generally didn't need to work. How admirable, Beatrice said, but her tone made it clear she thought it was anything but admirable. Gabriel, sensing the tension, changed the subject. Caroline is very dedicated to her studies. She's at the top of her class. Was it a lie or the truth? Caroline didn't even know, but she was silently grateful for the intervention. The rest of the night passed in a blur of superficial conversations, curious glances, and forced smiles. When it was finally time to leave, Caroline felt an immense relief. In the car on the way back, she let out a long sigh. Gabriel looked at her. Tired. Exhausted, she admitted, and a little humiliated. Gabriel frowned. Why? Those people looked at me as if I were an intruder, as if I didn't belong there. And they're right. I don't belong. Gabriel was silent for a few seconds. Then he said something that surprised her. I don't feel like I belong either. Caroline looked at him. What do you mean? You were born into that world. I was born into it, he agreed. But I never felt a part of it. I've always been a chess piece being moved on their board, just like you are now. There was a raw honesty in those words. Caroline realized that in a way they were both prisoners. He of impossible family expectations, she of desperate financial circumstances. I'm sorry if that was difficult, Gabriel said. It will get easier with time. Will it? Caroline asked, unconvinced. No, Gabriel admitted. Probably not. But you'll learn to fake it better. I did. I don't know if I want to learn to fake it, Caroline said softly. Gabriel looked at her, and for the first time there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was something close to understanding. "Then you're braver than I am." The car stopped in front of Caroline's building. The driver opened the door. Caroline was about to get out when Gabriel called her name. "Caroline," she looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for going. I know it wasn't easy." It was the closest thing to kindness he had shown. Caroline nodded. "You're welcome." And so, their first public appearance ended. Caroline went up to the apartment feeling exhausted, confused and strangely moved. Martha was waiting up for her. "So," Caroline threw herself on the couch. "So, Mom, I think I've officially entered a world I'm not sure I can understand." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of meticulous preparations. Gabriel, true to his style, turned the event into a project to be managed with military efficiency. There were spreadsheets, timelines, and task lists distributed among an entire team of professionals hired specifically for that purpose. Caroline tried to participate in the decisions, but she quickly realized her opinion was more a formality than a reality. Gabriel already had very clear ideas about how everything should be. The ceremony would be in the private chapel of the family's estate in the Hamptons. Small, only 30 guests. The dress would be from a renowned designer Gabriel had already hired. The flowers, the decorations, the menu, everything was already decided. "Don't you want to know what I think about any of this?" Caroline asked during a planning meeting in Gabriel's office. He looked up from his laptop screen. "Do you have any specific preferences?" "I'd like to have a say in the choices." Gabriel closed his laptop and looked at her attentively. "I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to ignore you. It's just that I'm used to controlling all the details, but you're right. It's your wedding too. What would you like to change?" Caroline thought for a moment. "I want my mother to be in the front row, and I want to choose the flowers." Gabriel nodded. "Done. Your mother will be in the front row, and tomorrow we'll go to the florist together for you to choose the flowers." It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to Caroline. It showed that Gabriel, despite all his rigidity, was trying. The next day they went to a sophisticated flower shop in the Jardines area. Caroline had never seen such a variety of flowers. There were imported roses, rare orchids, enormous lilies. The owner, an elegant woman named Cecilia, presented several options. Caroline fell in love with the white peonies. There was something delicate and romantic about them that touched her. "I want these," she said. Cecilia smiled. "Excellent choice. Peonies symbolize romance, prosperity, and good fortune in marriage." Caroline looked at Gabriel, wondering what he thought about romantic symbolism. He remained neutral. "If that's what you want, then it will be peonies." While Cecilia wrote down the order, Caroline noticed Gabriel observing the flowers with a strange expression, almost curious. "You don't like flowers?" she asked. "I've never thought about it," he replied. "In my house, flowers were always just decoration. I never stopped to really look at them." Caroline gently picked up a peony. "Look now, then." Gabriel came closer and observed the flower Caroline was holding. There were layers and layers of white petals, each perfectly formed, with a slightly pink center. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "Fragile. But strong, too," Caroline added. "They survive the harshest winter and bloom in the spring." Gabriel looked at her. "Are you talking about the flower or yourself?" Caroline smiled slightly. "Maybe both." There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable, just laden with something unsaid. Then Gabriel took a step back, returning to his safe distance. "Let's finalize the details with Cecilia." In the following days, Caroline was introduced to the Vaughanwood family more formally. First, she met Helen, Gabriel's mother. They met for tea at the Upper East Side mansion. Helen was a 52-year-old woman, impeccably dressed with blonde hair tied in an elegant bun and a look of permanent exhaustion in her eyes. She received Caroline with cold politeness, but not hostility. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Caroline," Helen said while pouring tea into fine porcelain cups. "The pleasure is mine," Caroline replied, trying not to show her nervousness. Helen studied her for a few seconds. "You're very young. I'm 23, and you're already marrying my son. I imagine this is a bit frightening. Caroline decided to be honest. It is frightening, yes, but it's also an opportunity to change my life and help my mother. Helen nodded as if appreciating her frankness. Gabriel told me about your mother's situation. I'm very sorry. Illnesses like that are devastating for the whole family. Thank you. A silence settled. Helen stirred her tea methodically without drinking. May I ask you a question? She finally said. Of course. Do you love my son? Caroline choked slightly on her tea. Helen waited patiently for the answer. I barely know him, Caroline admitted. But I'm trying. Helen smiled, but it was a sad smile. Good luck with that. Gabriel doesn't let himself be known easily. He's been trained his whole life not to let anyone in. Believe me, I've tried. There was genuine pain in that voice. Caroline realized that Helen was also a victim of the family system that had shaped Gabriel. Why didn't you fight harder for him? Caroline asked gently. Helen looked away at the perfect gardens through the window. Because I was broken too, dear. I married Marshall when I was 19. I thought it would be a fairy tale. But the Vaughanwoods don't believe in fairy tales. They believe in legacies, in bloodlines, in control. I slowly faded away. And by the time I realized it, it was too late. Gabriel had already been molded in their image. Caroline felt a wave of empathy. You can still try to reconnect with him. Helen looked at her with teary eyes. You think so? I think it's never too late. Helen reached out and held Caroline's hand. You have a good heart, young lady. I hope it doesn't get destroyed in this family. It won't, Caroline promised, with more conviction than she actually felt. The meeting with Henry Vaughanwood was completely different. He summoned Caroline for a private meeting in the library, the same place where he had given Gabriel the ultimatum months ago. Henry was exactly as Caroline had imagined, imposing, cold, with eyes. That seemed to calculate the value of everything and everyone. He didn't offer tea, he didn't offer pleasantries. He got straight to the point. You signed the contract. Do you understand what that means? I understand, Caroline replied, maintaining an upright posture. You will marry my grandson, you will appear by his side at public events, you will produce an heir, and you will maintain the family's impeccable image. Any scandal, any slip-up, and there will be consequences. Is that clear? Very clear. Henry studied her with those piercing eyes. You're not like the other candidates. You don't come from a traditional family. You have no money, you have no connections. Why do you think I approved this marriage? Because Gabriel chose me? Henry let out a dry laugh. Gabriel doesn't choose anything. He executes. I approved because you are pragmatic. You understand that this is a transaction. You won't create ridiculous romantic expectations. You won't try to change Gabriel. You will fulfill your role, and that's it. Caroline felt anger rising, but she controlled it. With all due respect, Mr. Vaughanwood, Gabriel is a grown man. He's not a puppet. Henry's eyes glinted with something close to interest. You have courage. That's good, you'll need it. But don't delude yourself into thinking you can save him or transform him. Gabriel is what we made him, and that doesn't change. We'll see, Caroline said, surprising herself with her boldness. Henry smiled slightly. I like you, girl. You have more backbone than you look. Just don't forget your place. And what is my place? Caroline asked. By Gabriel's side, fulfilling your role. Nothing more, nothing less. Caroline left that meeting with a bitter taste in her mouth. That family was toxic, controlling, destructive, and Gabriel had grown up at the center of it all. For the first time, she truly understood why he was the way he was. The days passed quickly. Caroline had to temporarily drop out of college to dedicate herself to the wedding preparations. She quit her job. Gabriel had already transferred the first installment of the financial compensation, and Caroline used part of it to pay off all her accumulated debts and ensure her mother's ongoing treatment. Martha, for her part, was getting weaker every day, but she insisted on being present at the wedding. I will see my daughter get married, even if it's the last thing I do, she said with determination. Caroline tried to convince her to rest, but she knew her mother. When Martha decided something, there was no changing her mind. A week before the wedding, Gabriel surprised Caroline with an invitation. Can we have dinner together tonight? Just the two of us. No agendas, no event planning. Caroline agreed, curious. They met at a small, discreet restaurant, far from the eyes of society. It was a simple, almost intimate place, very different from the environments they usually frequented. "Why here?" Caroline asked. "Because I wanted to have a real conversation with you." No performances, no masks. Caroline sat down, intrigued. "About what?" Gabriel hesitated, which was rare for him. "About us. About what will happen after the wedding." "What will happen?" "We'll live together, in my penthouse. I'll arrange a separate room for you, obviously, but we'll share the same space, and I realized I know nothing about you beyond what's in the contract." Caroline blinked, surprised. "You want to get to know me?" "I think it would be prudent. After all, we're going to spend 2 years together." It was pragmatic, of course, but it was also an effort. Caroline decided to reciprocate. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Your childhood, your dreams, what you like to do, what makes you happy." And so, during that unlikely dinner, Caroline opened up. She told him about growing up in Queens, about the constant financial difficulties, about the father who left when she was 5 and never came back. She told him about the mother who worked 2 jobs to raise her alone, who always encouraged her studies, who sacrificed everything for her. She told him about her dream of graduating with an engineering degree, of building things, of leaving a positive legacy in the world. Gabriel listened to everything in silence, absorbing every word. When Caroline finished, he was thoughtful for a moment. "You're lucky," he finally said. "Lucky," Caroline repeated, incredulous. "I grew up in poverty. My father abandoned us. My mother is dying. But you had love. Your mother loved you. She taught you what affection is, what true sacrifice is. I never had that. I had everything materially, but nothing emotionally." Caroline's heart ached. "It's not too late to learn, Gabriel." "I don't know if I can." "You can try." Gabriel looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "Caroline, I need you to understand something. I know this marriage is a transaction. I know you're doing this for the money, and that's fine. But I also want you to know that I will try to be fair to you. I will try not to make this harder than it already is." "I appreciate that," Caroline said, "and I'll do the same." "There's one more thing," Gabriel continued, clearly uncomfortable. "The part of the contract about physical intimacy, about producing an heir, I don't know how to do that." Caroline felt her face flush. "I don't have much experience either." "But you've had a boyfriend, you know the basics." "Not about intentionally conceiving a child," Caroline admitted, "but I imagine we can figure it out together." Gabriel nodded, but the tension was palpable. "Can we wait a bit? It doesn't have to be immediately after the wedding. We can get used to living together first, to knowing each other better." Caroline felt an immense relief. "Yes, I'd prefer that." "Thank you," Gabriel said, and for the first time he seemed genuinely grateful. The rest of the dinner proceeded in a lighter atmosphere. They talked about trivial things, movies they liked, books they'd read, places they wanted to visit. Caroline discovered that Gabriel had an impressive memory for numbers and data, but a surprising curiosity about art and music, areas he never had time to explore. "You should go to a concert," Caroline suggested. "Live music is completely different from listening to recordings." Gabriel considered it. "We could go together, after the wedding." Caroline smiled. "It's a date." When the night ended and they said goodbye at the door of Caroline's building, there was an awkward moment. Gabriel stood there, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Caroline waited. Finally, he just said, "Good night, Caroline." "Good night, Gabriel." But as she went up in the elevator, Caroline felt that something had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A small crack in the armor of ice that Gabriel wore. The last few days before the wedding were chaotic. Final dress fittings, rehearsals at the chapel, last-minute checks of all the details. Caroline barely had time to breathe. Martha was getting weaker, but she insisted on participating in everything. She went to Caroline's dress fitting and cried when She saw her. "You're so beautiful, my daughter. So beautiful." Caroline hugged her mother carefully, afraid of hurting her. She was so frail now, so light. "Thank you for being here with me, Mom." "I wouldn't miss this for anything," Martha whispered. The night before the wedding, Caroline couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that was about to happen. Tomorrow, she would marry a man she barely knew. Tomorrow, her life would change completely. Was she doing the right thing? Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Gabriel. "Are you awake?" Caroline replied, "Yes, I can't sleep." "Me neither." "Nervous?" "A little." "And you?" "Terrified." There was a pause. Then Gabriel wrote, "We'll get through this together. It may not be the traditional wedding you dreamed of, but I promise I will respect you." Caroline felt her eyes well up. "Thank you, Gabriel. That means a lot. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Good night." "Good night." Caroline put her phone aside and finally managed to relax a little. Yes, this wedding was unusual. Yes, it was based on a contract, but at least Gabriel was being honest, and, in a way, there was honor in that. The next morning, Caroline woke up to the sun streaming through the window. Today was the day she would become Caroline Miller Vaughanwood. A team of professionals arrived early to prepare her. Makeup, hair, manicure. Everything was done with military precision. When she finally put on the dress, a classic white lace model with a long train, Caroline looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked like a fairy tale princess, but she knew the reality would be very different from the fairy tale. Martha, already dressed in an elegant outfit that Gabriel had provided, entered the room. She stopped at the door and brought her hands to her chest. "My daughter, my beautiful girl." They hugged, crying together. "I love you, Mom," Caroline whispered. "I love you too, honey. And I'm so proud of you. So proud of the strong woman you've become." The car that would take them to the Hamptons arrived. It was about a 2-hour drive. Throughout the journey, Caroline looked out the window, watching the landscape gradually change from urban to rural, from grey to green. When they finally arrived at the estate in the Hamptons, Caroline was impressed. It was even larger and more imposing than the mansion in New York, surrounded by hills with vast gardens and an architecture that mixed colonial elements with modern touches. The chapel was at the back of the property, a small but beautiful stone building with stained glass windows that filtered the sunlight. Caroline was taken to a room for final preparations. Through the window, she could see the guests arriving. She recognized some faces from the social events she had attended with Gabriel. Others were complete strangers. And then Robert knocked on the door. "It's time, Caroline." Caroline's heart pounded. She picked up her bouquet of white peonies, adjusted her veil and left the room. Martha was waiting for her in the hallway, already in a wheelchair that Gabriel had provided to make it easier for her to get around. "You can do this, honey," Martha said, squeezing her hand. Caroline nodded, swallowing her fear. The chapel doors opened, the music began, and Caroline took the first step toward her uncertain future. The chapel was illuminated by the soft light filtering through the stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the marble floor. Caroline began to walk, slowly down the central aisle, clutching her bouquet of peonies so tightly that her knuckles turned white. There was no father to walk her down the aisle, so she walked alone, with Martha watching from the front row, her eyes shining with tears. And there, at the altar, stood Gabriel. He wore an impeccably tailored tuxedo, his hair combed back, his posture as erect as ever. But when his eyes met Caroline's, there was something different in them. It wasn't just the usual coldness. There was surprise, perhaps even admiration. Caroline reached the altar and stood beside him. The priest, an elderly man with a solemn voice, began the ceremony. He spoke of union, of commitment, of the sanctity of matrimony. Each word seemed to echo strangely in that context, considering the true nature of their marriage. When it was time for the vows, Gabriel went first. "I, Gabriel James Vaughanwood, take you, Caroline Miller, to be my wife. I promise to respect you, to care for you, and to honor our agreement, until death or other circumstances do us part. Other circumstances. The contract. Even there, in that supposedly sacred moment, he couldn't help but be literal, technical. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances at the unusual wording of the vows. Then it was Caroline's turn. She took a deep breath. I, Caroline Miller, take you, Gabriel James Vaughanwood, to be my husband. I promise to respect you, to support you, and to honor our agreement, until death or other circumstances do us part. She used his exact words, maintaining the symmetry. Gabriel seemed to appreciate that. There was a slight relaxation in his shoulders. The priest then declared them husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. There was a moment of palpable hesitation. Gabriel looked at Caroline, and she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had never truly kissed anyone, and now he had to do it in front of 30 people. Caroline took a step forward, closing the distance between them. She tilted her face slightly, making it easier. Gabriel leaned down and pressed his lips against hers in a quick, chaste, almost formal kiss. It lasted only 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, Caroline felt his lips tremble imperceptibly. When they pulled apart, the guests applauded politely. Gabriel took Caroline's hand and they walked back down the aisle together, now as husband and wife. Outside the chapel, hired photographers were there to capture the moment. They posed for dozens of photos, always with discreet but distant smiles. With each flash, Caroline felt the weight of the performance. This was a play, a very well-produced play, but a play nonetheless. The reception was held in the main hall of the mansion, decorated with the peonies Caroline had chosen. The tables were set with fine china, expensive crystal, and impeccable floral arrangements. Everything was perfect, everything was cold. During dinner, Caroline sat next to Gabriel at the head table. They spoke politely with the guests, but there was an underlying tension. Caroline noticed the curious glances, the whispered conversations. Everyone there knew this marriage was unusual, but no one dared to ask directly. Henry Vaughanwood made a formal toast, speaking of legacy, continuity, and the future. He never mentioned love once. Marshall, Gabriel's father, made another equally cold toast, focusing on responsibility and family image. Helen, his mother, raised her glass but said nothing, just looked at Gabriel with sadness. When it was time for the bride and groom's waltz, Caroline felt her panic rise. Gabriel seemed tense too. They moved to the center, of the ballroom as the orchestra began to play. Gabriel placed one hand on her waist and held her hand with the other. His posture was correct, technically perfect, but rigid. They began to dance in mechanical, counted steps. "You're very tense," Caroline whispered. "I don't know how to dance," Gabriel admitted quietly. "I learned the steps, but I've never really danced." "Just feel the music," Caroline suggested. "Let your body respond." "I don't know how to do that." Caroline felt a wave of compassion. She placed her free hand on his shoulder and moved a little closer. "Close your eyes," she said, "and just follow me." Gabriel hesitated, but he obeyed. He closed his eyes. Caroline guided their movements, making them more fluid, more natural. And gradually, Gabriel began to relax. The steps became less mechanical. The dance began to feel like a real dance. When the music ended and they separated, Gabriel opened his eyes and looked at Caroline with something close to gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. "You're welcome," she replied. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. More conversations, more forced smiles, more performances. Caroline was emotionally exhausted when it was finally time to leave. They said their goodbyes to the guests and got into the car that would take them back to New York. There would be no traditional honeymoon. Gabriel had important meetings the following week and couldn't be away. Caroline, in any case, didn't want to spend weeks faking romance in some exotic destination. During the ride back, they remained silent. Caroline looked out the window, processing everything that had happened. She was married, legally married to Gabriel Vaughanwood. It felt surreal. "Are you okay?" Gabriel suddenly asked. "Tired. And you?" "The same. But relieved it's over." The wedding or the ceremony? Gabriel thought for a moment. Both. Caroline smiled slightly. I understand. Carolyn, Gabriel said hesitantly. About today. About the kiss. I'm sorry if it was awkward. Was that your first real kiss? It was, he admitted, and it was probably noticeable. It was brief, but it wasn't terrible. Gabriel looked at her with surprise. Really? Really. Considering the circumstances, it was appropriate. Thank you for being kind. I know this must be strange for you too. It is, Caroline agreed, but we'll figure out how to navigate this together. When they arrived at Gabriel's penthouse in Soho, it was already early morning. The apartment was exactly as Caroline had imagined. Minimalist, modern, shades of grey and white, expensive but cold designer furniture. There were no personal photographs, no objects that indicated personality. It was like living in an architecture magazine. Gabriel showed her the room he had prepared for her. It was spacious with a king-sized bed, a huge walk-in closet, and a private bathroom. Everything was new. Everything was impersonal. I hope it's adequate, Gabriel said. If you need anything, just ask. My room is at the end of the hall. It's perfect, thank you, Caroline said. Although perfect was the last word she would use to describe the situation. Get some rest. We'll have a lot to adjust to tomorrow. Gabriel went to his room, and Caroline was left alone. She sat on the bed, still in her wedding dress, and let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness exactly. They were tears of exhaustion, of confusion, of fear of the unknown. She had just gotten married, but she was completely alone. The first few days of living together were strange and awkward. Gabriel woke up very early at 5 in the morning, went to the building's private gym, came back, showered and left for work before 7. Caroline would wake up later, make coffee, explore the apartment. They barely saw each other during the day. Gabriel spent long hours at the office. Caroline tried to keep busy by reading, studying, and reorganizing her plans to return to college next semester. But the loneliness was oppressive. Their meals together were silent and awkward. Gabriel ate methodically, always checking emails on his phone. Caroline tried to start conversations, but received monosyllabic answers. Until one night, about a week after the wedding, Caroline decided that had to change. She made dinner. Nothing too elaborate, just a simple pasta with homemade sauce, a salad, and wine. She set the dining room table, which was never used, with candles and nice napkins she found in a cabinet. When Gabriel came home from work and saw it, he stopped in surprise. "What's this?" "Dinner," Caroline replied. "I thought it would be nice to eat together for real. No phones, no distractions." Gabriel hesitated. "I have work to review." "You can review it later. 1 hour won't make a difference." He gave in, probably because he didn't know how to politely refuse. They sat at the table. Gabriel ate in silence at first, but Caroline persisted in asking questions. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive. We closed the merger with the renewable energy company." "Is that good?" "It's strategic." "Do you like what you do?" Gabriel stopped eating and looked at her. "No one's ever asked me that before." "Never?" "Never. People ask about results, about profits, about targets. But not if I like it." "And do you?" Gabriel thought for a long moment. "I'm good at it, but like it. I don't know if that's a relevant question." "Of course it's relevant. You spend most of your life working. You should at least like what you do." "And you like engineering?" Gabriel asked, turning the question back on her. "I love it. I love the idea of building things, of creating solutions to real problems. When I go back to college, I want to specialize in sustainability, projects that make a difference." Gabriel watched her with genuine interest. "You have passion. That's rare. You're not passionate about anything?" Gabriel fell silent, vulnerable. "I don't know. I was never allowed to be." That answer broke Caroline's heart. "You're allowed now." "Am I?" "Yes. You're not in your family's house anymore. You don't have to perform all the time. You can discover who you really are." Gabriel seemed bewildered by the idea, as if it were a completely foreign concept. "I don't even know where to start." Start small. Think of something you're curious about, something you'd like to explore if you didn't have obligations. Gabriel thought. Music. I've always been curious about music, how it's created, how composers translate emotions into notes. Then explore it. Go to concerts, learn about music. You don't have to become a musician. Just allow yourself to have an interest. And work, the company? It will keep running. You can delegate more. You can hire competent people. You don't have to control every detail. Gabriel was thoughtful for the rest of the dinner. When they finished, he helped Caroline take the plates to the kitchen, something she hadn't expected. "Thank you," he said, "for dinner and for the conversation." "You're welcome. Can we do this more often?" "Yes, I'd like that." It was a small step, but it was a step. In the following weeks, they established a routine. They had dinner together at least 3 times a week. Caroline cooked, something she discovered she enjoyed, and Gabriel gradually began to open up. He told her about the pressure at work, about his family's impossible expectations, about the loneliness he felt, even when surrounded by people. Caroline listened, offered perspective, and asked questions no one had ever asked him. And she opened up too. She told him about her childhood, about her dreams, about her fear of losing her mother. Gabriel listened with a surprising attentiveness. He absorbed every word, processed it, and responded with genuine thoughts. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Gabriel came home with tickets to a concert by the New York Philharmonic. "You said I should go," he explained, a bit self-consciously. "I thought we could go together." Caroline smiled. "I'd love that." On the day of the concert, they got dressed up and went to Lincoln Center. Caroline wore an elegant but comfortable dress. Gabriel, as always, was impeccable in a suit. When the music began, Caroline watched Gabriel. At first he was tense, rigid, but gradually, as the music filled the theater, he began to relax. His shoulders dropped, his breathing deepened, and for the first time, since Caroline had met him, there was something close to peace on his face. During the intermission, they went to the theater bar for a glass of wine. Gabriel was different. There was a sparkle in his eyes. "That was incredible," he said, "completely different from listening to recordings." "I told you," Caroline smiled. "Thank you for encouraging me to come. Thank you for bringing me." They stood there, drinking wine, talking about the music, the musicians, about how impressive it was to see dozens of people playing in perfect sync. Gabriel was excited in a way Caroline had never seen. When they returned home that night, Gabriel seemed lighter. They sat in the living room, still too energized to sleep. "Caroline," Gabriel said suddenly, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that there's life beyond work, beyond obligations. I was so trapped in my routine that I didn't even realize I was just existing, not living. You deserve to live, Gabriel. To really live." Gabriel looked at her with an intensity that surprised her. "You deserve it too. And I hope that these 2 years, even though they're based on a contract, give you something more than financial security." "They already are," Caroline admitted. "I'm learning about a world I never had access to. I'm having time to think about my future without constant financial desperation, and I'm getting to know you." "And what do you think of getting to know me?" Gabriel hesitated, but then said, "I think you're more complex than you appear. I think behind that cold facade, there's someone who's trying very hard to connect, but doesn't know how." "You're right," he admitted. "I don't know how, but with you it's getting a little easier." There was a moment of charged silence between them. Something was changing. The dynamic between them was evolving from a cold agreement to something deeper. Then Gabriel did something surprising. He reached out and took Caroline's hand. The touch was hesitant, almost shy, but it was there. Caroline looked at their intertwined hands. It was the first time Gabriel had voluntarily initiated physical contact. "Is this okay?" he asked, uncertain. "It is," Caroline replied softly. They stayed like that for a few minutes, just holding hands, not speaking, and in that silence there was a communication deeper than any words could express. Finally, Gabriel gently released her hand. "We should get some rest, it's late." "Yes," Caroline agreed. "Good night, Caroline." "Good night, Gabriel." She went to her room with her heart racing. This was dangerous. She was starting to feel something for Gabriel, something real, and that wasn't in the contract. In the following days, Gabriel's behavior changed subtly. He started coming home earlier. He delegated more work. He made time for dinners with Caroline. He asked about her day. He shared more about his. He also began to seek small forms of physical contact. A touch on the shoulder as he passed, holding the door. For her, sitting closer on the couch when they watched something together. Caroline reciprocated, but cautiously. She didn't want to push. She knew that for Gabriel, every small gesture of intimacy was a huge step. One Saturday, about 2 months after the wedding, they decided to spend the day out. They went to Central Park, something surprisingly normal for a couple like them. They walked along the tree-lined paths, watched people riding bikes, and sat on the grass for a simple picnic Caroline had prepared. Gabriel was visibly uncomfortable at first. He wasn't used to such open, casual environments, but Caroline encouraged him to relax. "Nobody here cares who you are," she said. "You're just another person enjoying a beautiful day." Gabriel looked around, watching families playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly people feeding birds. "It's peaceful," he admitted. "It's normal," Caroline corrected. "And normal is good." They spent hours there just talking, watching the world go by. At one point, Gabriel lay down on the grass, looking up at the blue sky through the treetops. Caroline lay down beside him. "When was the last time you did this?" Caroline asked. "Never," Gabriel replied. "I've never just stopped to look at the sky." "You've been missing out," Caroline said. "The sky is different every day." Gabriel turned his head to look at her. "You see beauty in things I don't even notice exist. Because you were taught to only look at results, at numbers, at targets, but life happens in the spaces between those things." Gabriel reached out and for the second time took Caroline's hand. "I'm starting to understand that." They lay there on the grass, holding hands, in a comfortable silence. People passed by, but no one recognized them. In that moment, they were just Gabriel and Caroline. Not the tycoon and the contractor, just two people trying to connect. 3 months of marriage had passed when the reality of the contract finally knocked on their door in an unavoidable way. Gabriel and Caroline had developed a comfortable routine, even a genuine friendship. But there was still a part of the agreement that remained untouched, the expectation of producing an heir. It was Henry who brought up the subject during a family dinner at the mansion. He waited until dessert was served to make the comment he had carefully prepared. "Gabriel, it's been 3 months. The press is starting to speculate about when there will be news about the family. We need results." Gabriel's jaw tensed. "This is not a topic to be discussed at the dinner table, grandfather." "It's a topic that needs to be discussed somewhere," Henry retorted. "You signed a contract, so did Caroline. Fulfill what was agreed upon." Caroline felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. They were talking about her as if she weren't there, as if she were just an instrument for a goal. "With all due respect, Mr. Vaughanwood," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fury. She felt, "My reproductive life is not a matter for public discussion." Henry looked at her with those cold eyes. "It became a matter when you signed that contract and received $1 million compensation." Gabriel slammed his hand on the table with enough force to make the silverware rattle. "Enough, this stops now." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Controlling your emotions, Gabriel." "Protecting my wife," Gabriel corrected. "And if you can't respect that, then we won't be coming back here." It was the first time Gabriel had directly confronted his grandfather. Everyone at the table fell into a shocked silence. Even Marshall seemed surprised. Henry studied his grandson for a long moment. Then he slowly nodded. "Very well. But the clock is still ticking, Gabriel. Don't forget that." "I haven't forgotten," Gabriel replied coldly. The dinner ended in a tense atmosphere. In the car on the way home, Caroline was trembling with suppressed anger. "How dare he?" she said. "How dare he speak like that, as if I were a baby-making machine?" Gabriel drove with a clenched jaw. "I'm sorry, my grandfather is cruel and controlling, he always has been. It's not about him being cruel, it's about the fact that he's right. I signed that contract, I agreed to those terms, and now I have to deliver. Caroline, you are not obligated to do anything you don't want to do. But I want to, she said, surprising them both. Not for the contract, not for the money, but because I've realized I want to have a child. I just don't know how to do it in a relationship that is essentially a business transaction. Gabriel stopped the car in the building's parking garage and was silent for a moment. Then turning to her, he said, "It doesn't have to be a transaction. It can be something more." "What?" Caroline asked, her heart racing. "It can be something real. Between us, if you want it to be." Caroline looked him in the eyes. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that these 3 months have changed something in me. I didn't know it was possible to feel a connection with another person. I didn't know it was possible to enjoy being with someone. But with you, I feel that. And if we're going to do this, if we're going to have a child together, I would like it to be because, we choose to, not because we were forced to." Caroline felt tears forming. "Gabriel, are you saying you have feelings for me?" Gabriel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "I'm saying you're the first person in my entire life who makes me want to try to feel, to try to connect. I don't know if this is love. I don't know how to recognize love. But I know that when I'm with you, the loneliness lessens." Caroline reached out and gently held his face. "This is love, Gabriel. Maybe not the kind from the movies, but it's real. And I feel the same way." Gabriel closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I don't know how to do this right." "Neither do I. But we can figure it out together." They stayed like that for a few minutes, just feeling each other's presence. Then Gabriel opened his eyes and asked, "Would you like to really try to have a real relationship? Not because of the contract, but because we choose to." "Yes," Caroline replied without hesitation. "I would." "Then let's go slowly, at our own pace. No pressure from the family, no timelines, just the two of us figuring out how this works." Caroline agreed. "Slowly, at our own pace." That night, when they arrived at the apartment, there was a palpable shift between them. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something deeper, more intimate. They sat on the couch, closer than they normally would. "Can I ask you a question?" Caroline said. "Of course." "Why did you never let yourself get involved with anyone before?" "It wasn't just family pressure. There was something more, wasn't there?" Gabriel was silent for a long time. Finally he answered, "I was afraid. Afraid that if I let someone in, they would see how empty I was inside, how broken, and they would leave. It's easier not to let anyone in than to risk rejection." "But you're not empty, Gabriel. You're complex. You've been hurt, but there's so much good in you that's waiting to be discovered." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see it. I see it when you listen to music and get emotional. I see it when you talk about projects that make a difference in the world. I see it when you worry about me, about my mother. You are capable of feeling, Gabriel. You were just taught to hide it." Gabriel looked at her with something close to reverence. "You see me in a way no one ever has, because I choose to see beyond the facade." Gabriel moved closer slowly, giving Caroline time to pull back if she wanted, but she didn't. She moved closer too, and when their lips met, it was completely different from the formal kiss at the wedding. It was hesitant at first, both still learning, still discovering. But there was tenderness there was intention. There was choice. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing heavily. Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "That was much better than the first one." Caroline laughed softly. "Practice makes perfect." "Can I practice more?" "Yes." They spent the night on the couch, just kissing, touching in a chaste but intimate way. They didn't go further than that. Both knew they needed to take it slow. Gabriel especially needed time to process each new experience. In the following days, their relationship evolved naturally. They started waking up together, having breakfast side by side. Gabriel began working fewer hours, coming home in the middle of the afternoon when possible. They cooked together, watched movies cuddled on the couch, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Caroline taught Gabriel about physical affection gradually, hugs when saying goodbye, good morning kisses. walking hand in hand around the house. Each small gesture was a revelation for Gabriel, who had never experienced casual intimacy. One night, about 2 weeks after that conversation in the car, Caroline noticed Gabriel was restless. He was pacing back and forth in the living room, clearly wanting to say something but not knowing how. "What is it?" she asked. Gabriel stopped and looked at her. "I want to take the next step, but I'm scared." Caroline went to him. "Scared of what?" "Of not knowing what to do, of disappointing you, of messing everything up." "Gabriel, you're not going to mess anything up, and there's no right or wrong way. There's our way." "But I've never," he started, frustrated. "I've read about it, obviously, researched it, but reading and doing are completely different." Caroline held his hands. "Then let's figure it out together. No expectations, no pressure, just the two of us learning from each other. And if I can't, then we'll try again, as many times as it takes." Gabriel pulled her into a hug, hiding his face in her neck. "Thank you for being so patient with me. Thank you for trusting me enough to be vulnerable." That night, they took the next step. It was awkward, nervous, filled with pauses and embarrassed laughter. Gabriel was tense, trying to do everything perfectly. Caroline guided him with infinite patience, showing him it didn't have to be perfect. It had to be real, and when it finally happened, it was intense not because of technique, but because of the emotional connection. Gabriel cried afterward, something that shocked him completely. He hadn't cried in front of anyone since he was a child. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to hide his tears. "Don't be sorry," Caroline replied, crying too. "This is normal. It's intense. It's maximum vulnerability. I didn't know it would be like this. So overwhelming. It's because you allowed yourself to feel. For the first time in your life, you truly connected with someone." Gabriel pulled her closer, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I think I'm in love with you." Caroline smiled through her tears. "I'm in love with you too." They stayed up all night talking, touching, rediscovering the intimacy that was once just a contract clause. Now it was choice, it was desire, it was love. In the following weeks, their relationship blossomed beautifully. Gabriel was different, lighter, more present. He smiled more, laughed more, allowed himself to be imperfect. At work, people noticed the change. He was more approachable, more willing to listen to different ideas. He delegated more, trusted his team more. The company didn't suffer from it. On the contrary, the employees worked better under a more human leader. Caroline returned to college, resuming her studies. In engineering, Gabriel insisted on paying all her tuition, but not as part of the contract, as a gift, as an investment in her future. Martha, who continued her treatment, noticed the change in her daughter. "You're happy," she observed during a visit. "I am, Mum. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "And Gabriel? Does he treat you well?" "He treats me with respect, with affection. He's learning to love. And I'm learning too." "So, was it worth it? This crazy arrangement?" Caroline thought for a moment. "It was, not for the money, not for the status, but because it brought me him. And he brought me to myself too." 4 months after that night in the car, Caroline found out she was pregnant. She took the test alone, at home, and stared at the 2 pink lines for long minutes. She was pregnant. She was going to have Gabriel's child. She felt a mix of emotions: joy, fear, excitement. This was real now, completely real. When Gabriel came home that night, Caroline was waiting for him in the living room with the test in her hand. He walked in, saw her expression, and stopped. "What is it?" he asked, worried. Caroline held out the test. "I'm pregnant." Gabriel froze. His eyes went from the test to Caroline's face and back to the test. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if processing the information. "Yes, we're going to have a baby." Gabriel sat down slowly, as if his legs had lost their strength. Caroline sat next to him, holding his hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," Gabriel admitted. "I don't know how to be a father. I didn't have a good example. I don't know how to be a mother either. But we'll figure it out together, and we'll do it differently. We'll raise our child with love, with affection, with the freedom to feel." Gabriel looked at her with shining eyes. "You think I can do it? Be a good father? You can. You've already changed so much. You've already learned so much. Our child will have the father you never had." Gabriel pulled her into a tight hug. "I love you, and I will love this baby. I will do everything right. You'll make mistakes sometimes. I will too. But we'll make them together, and we'll always put our child's well-being first." They held each other for a long time, letting the reality sink in. They were going to be parents, not because a contract demanded it, but because they chose to build a life together. The news of the pregnancy was met with varied reactions. Henry was pleased, seeing it as the fulfillment of the contract. Marshall was formally polite. Helen, surprisingly, was the most emotional. She hugged Caroline and cried, talking about how happy she was to be a grandmother. The press went wild. Vaughan would air on the way. Gabriel and Caroline photographed radiant. The most powerful family in America expands. Caroline started to show. Gabriel was fascinated. He would place his hand on her belly every night, talking to the baby, promising to be a good father. It was during one of these nightly conversations that Caroline realized just how much he had changed. The man of ice she had met 8 months ago no longer existed. In his place was a man who loved deeply, who allowed himself to be vulnerable, who was desperately trying to break his family's destructive patterns. One day, 5 months into the pregnancy, Gabriel came home earlier than usual. Caroline was on the couch reading a book about motherhood. "I've made a decision," he announced. "About what?" "About the company. I'm promoting Richard to CEO. I'll remain as chairman of the board, but I won't be involved in the day-to-day operations anymore." Caroline closed her book, surprised. "Why?" "Because I don't want to repeat my father's mistake. I don't want to be an absent father. I want to be present. I want to see our child grow up. I want to have family dinners every night. I want to have time to be a husband and a father, not just a businessman." Caroline felt her eyes well. "Therese, are you sure the company is everything to your family?" "It was everything, but now you and our child are everything. The company will continue to exist. Richard is competent, but this phase of our child's life, I'll never get back, and I don't want to miss it." Caroline stood up and hugged him. "I love you so much. I love you too, and I'll prove it every day." And he did. In the following months, Gabriel completely reorganized his life. He drastically reduced his work hours. He started therapy to deal with childhood trauma. He spent time with Helen, reconnecting with the mother who was also trying to heal. He and Caroline set up the baby's room together. They painted the walls a soft yellow. They chose safe but beautiful furniture. They filled shelves with children's books. Gabriel assembled the crib himself, following the instructions meticulously, but with love in every tightened screw. When Caroline's belly was huge, in her 8th month, they decided to get married again. Not legally, they were already married, but symbolically. A small ceremony just for them and the people who truly mattered. It was in the same park where they had lain, on the grass months ago. No priest, no formalities, just honest promises to each other. "I, Gabriel, promise to love you every day. I promise to be vulnerable with you. I promise to raise our child with the affection I never had. I promise to never again hide my feelings. I promise that this marriage will be real in every sense. I, Caroline, promise to love you unconditionally. I promise to be patient with your process. I promise to raise our child with the freedom to feel. I promise that we will build a different, healthy family, full of love." They exchanged new rings, not the ones from the original wedding, but rings they chose together, engraved with their own promises. And they kissed under the open sky, with Martha, Helen, and a few true friends as witnesses. The birth of Helena Vaughanwood Miller was a moment that changed everything definitively and irreversibly. Caroline went into labor on a spring morning when the flowers in the park they loved so much were in full bloom. Gabriel was by her side every second, holding her hand, wiping her sweat, whispering words of encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, crying loud and healthy, Gabriel cried too. He cried in a way he had never cried before, tears of pure joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love. When the nurse placed Helena in his arms for the first time, he was mesmerized, looking at this tiny being who depended completely on him. "Hi, little one," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm your dad, and I promise I'm going to do everything right. You will know you are loved. Every single day of your life, you will know." Caroline, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband and daughter with a heart overflowing. The man, who had never been touched with affection, now held a child with such gentleness and love that it seemed impossible he was the same person. In the first few days at home with Helena, Gabriel was simultaneously amazed and terrified. He would wake up in the middle of the night at her slightest whimper, rush to the crib, check if she was breathing. He changed diapers with the concentration of a delicate surgery. He warmed bottles, checking the temperature dozens of times. Caroline watched him with tenderness. "You're doing great," she would say when she saw him particularly anxious. "I don't know what I'm doing," Gabriel would admit. "Nobody does, all parents are improvising. But you're doing it with love, and that's what matters." Gabriel began to sing to Helena, songs he heard at the concerts he now regularly attended. His voice wasn't perfect, but it was filled with emotion. Helena seemed to calm down at the sound, her little eyes closing slowly as her father sang. One evening, when Helena was just 2 weeks old, Martha came to visit. She was very frail now, but she insisted on meeting her granddaughter. Gabriel welcomed her with respect and affection, helping her settle comfortably on the couch. When Martha held Helena for the first time, tears streamed down her wrinkled face. "She's perfect," she whispered. "So perfect." Caroline knelt beside her mother. "She has your name, Mom. Helena Martha." Martha looked at her daughter with shining eyes. "You gave me everything, honey. Health, time, the chance to meet my granddaughter. I couldn't ask for more. You're going to be here for a long time yet, Mom. The treatment is working." Martha smiled, but it was a smile that carried wisdom. "It was, dear, but my body is tired, and that's okay. I've done what I came here to do. I raised you. I saw you become a strong woman. I saw you find true love. I saw you become a mother. My mission is complete." Caroline felt her chest tighten. "Don't talk like that, Mom." Martha caressed her daughter's face. "Listen, when the time comes, and it will, I don't want you to despair. I want you to celebrate the life we had together. I want you to be happy. Do you understand me?" Caroline couldn't answer. She just hugged her mother, crying silently. Gabriel, who had been watching the scene from a distance, felt his heart break. He approached and placed a hand on Caroline's shoulder. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, "thank you for raising such an incredible woman, for teaching me through her what true love is." Martha looked at Gabriel. "Take care of her, Gabriel. Take care of my daughter and my granddaughter, and be happy. You deserve it." "I promise," Gabriel said. Martha spent 2 more weeks visiting regularly, getting to know her granddaughter, watching Caroline adapt to motherhood. Then, on a quiet autumn morning, she was gone. In her sleep, peacefully, without pain, as she had wished. Caroline received the news with deep pain, but also with gratitude. Her mother had lived long enough to see everything fall into place. She had seen her daughter happy, safe, loved. She had met her granddaughter. She had departed, complete. Gabriel held Caroline through her grief. He cancelled all his meetings, all his obligations. He stayed by his wife's side every second, holding her when she cried, listening to stories about Martha, helping to organize a simple but beautiful ceremony. On the day of the farewell, Caroline held Helena in her arms and whispered, "Grandma loved you so much, my daughter, even in the short time she had with you, and I will tell you about her every day. You will know the incredible woman she was." Henry Vaughanwood was also aging rapidly. The patriarch's health, always seemingly unshakable, began to fail. He had a serious cardiac event that left him weakened. For the first time in decades, he seemed vulnerable. Gabriel went to visit him in the hospital with some reluctance. There was so much accumulated resentment, so much pain that man had caused. But when he saw his grandfather in the hospital bed, pale and frail, he felt something shift. Henry was awake, looking out the window. When Gabriel entered, he turned his head slowly. "You came," he said, his voice weaker than Gabriel had ever heard. "I came," Gabriel confirmed, sitting in the chair beside the bed. There was a long silence. Then Henry said, "I ruined everything, didn't I?" Gabriel hadn't expected that. "What?" "With you. With your father. I perpetuated a cycle of coldness, of control. I thought I was preparing you for the world, but I was just breaking you." Gabriel felt his throat tighten. "Why? Why was it like that?" Henry closed his eyes. "Because that's how I was raised. My father was even stricter. I thought I was improving things, but I was just repeating them. And now, at the end, I see the damage I've caused." "And why are you telling me this now?" "Because I don't want to die without apologizing, and because I saw you with your daughter. I saw the way you hold her, the way you look at her. You broke the cycle, Gabriel. You're doing it differently." Gabriel felt tears burning his eyes. "It was hard, it was painful, and you almost destroyed my ability to love." Henry opened his eyes, and there were tears there too. "I know, and I'm sorry, truly. If I could go back and do it differently, I would." "But you can't," Gabriel said, "not with cruelty, but with honesty. What's done is done." "I know, but I can do one thing. I can release you." Henry breathed with difficulty. "That ridiculous contract. Tear it up. Live your life with Caroline because you choose to, not because a piece of paper says you must." Gabriel looked at his grandfather. "We already tore up the contract, grandfather, months ago. We're together because we love each other." Henry smiled faintly, a sad but genuine smile. "Good. That's good. So at least one thing I didn't ruin completely." Gabriel hesitated, fighting against decades of hurt. Then he reached out and held his grandfather's frail hand. "You gave me something, grandfather. You gave me the motivation to never be like you, to do things differently, and in that, in a strange way, you gave me a gift." Henry squeezed his grandson's hand with what little strength he had. "Do it differently, be happy, and when your daughter asks about her great-grandfather, tell her the truth. But also tell her that in the end he tried to make peace." "I will." Henry relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted from him. "Can I meet her, Helena?" "Tomorrow," Gabriel promised. "I'll bring Caroline and Helena." And he did. The next day, Caroline and Gabriel brought little Helena, now 3 months old, to meet her great-grandfather. Henry held her with extreme care, looking at that tiny face with a mixture of awe and sadness. "She's perfect," he whispered. "A new generation, a chance to do it all right." "We will," Gabriel assured him. Henry spent a few more days in the hospital, gradually regaining his strength. The doctors said he could go home, but that he needed to drastically reduce stress and activity. The empire he had built would finally need to be managed by others. Gabriel officially took over as chairman of the board, but kept his word not to get involved in daily operations. He delegated, trusted, and allowed others to lead. And surprisingly, the company thrived even more. When Helena was 6 months old, Gabriel and Caroline decided to take a family trip. Not to an exotic or luxurious place. They went, upstate, to the town where Gabriel's great-grandfather had built the first textile mill decades ago. The factory still existed, modernized but retaining some original elements. Gabriel walked through the halls with Helena in his arms, showing his daughter where the family's fortune came from. "It all started here," he said, "a man with a dream working hard. But somewhere along the way, they forgot the most important thing. They forgot to live. They forgot to love." "We won't forget," Caroline said, standing beside him. "No, we'll remember every day." They returned to New York, renewed. Gabriel implemented changes in the company, focusing on social responsibility, sustainability, and employee well-being. Not because it increased profits, but because it was the right thing to do. Caroline went back to college when Helena was a little older, taking the remaining courses. Gabriel took care of their daughter while his wife was in class, discovering the simple joy of playing, changing diapers, and making baby food. One afternoon, when Helena was almost a year old, Gabriel was on the living room floor playing with blocks with her. Caroline arrived from college and stopped at the door watching the scene. The man of ice had completely melted. In his place was a loving father, laughing at his daughter's attempts to stack the blocks, applauding every small achievement. "See that, Helena?" Gabriel was saying. "You did it! You're so smart!" Helena clapped her hands, laughing with that gurgling baby laugh. Gabriel picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing together. Caroline felt tears of happiness. This was all she had ever wanted. Not the mansion, not the money, not the status. Just this. A family that truly loved each other. Gabriel noticed Caroline at the door. "Hi, love. How was class?" "Good, but this is better," she said, joining them on the floor. They stayed there, the three of them, playing together. Helena eventually got tired and fell asleep in her father's arms. Gabriel rocked her gently, singing softly. "You're an amazing father," Caroline said. "I'm trying, every day I'm trying." "You're succeeding." Gabriel looked at his sleeping daughter in his arms. "You know what's strange? I was so afraid of becoming my father, of repeating my family's mistakes. But now I realize I had the choice all along. I just needed to choose differently. And you did. We did. Together." That night, after putting Helena to bed, Gabriel and Caroline sat on the balcony watching the city lights. "Do you have any regrets?" Gabriel asked suddenly. "About what?" "About signing that contract, about accepting this crazy arrangement." Caroline thought for a moment. "If you had asked me a year ago, maybe, but now, no. Because the contract brought me you, and you brought me love, family, a life I never imagined was possible. Even though it started as a transaction. Especially because it started that way. It shows that true love doesn't follow a script. It can be born from the most unlikely places." Gabriel pulled her closer. "I love you. In a way I didn't even know was possible. I love you too." They stayed there in a comfortable silence. 2 years had passed since the original contract. The term had expired. Technically, Caroline could leave now, taking a fortune and the freedom she had always wanted, but she didn't go anywhere. Because she had found her home, not in the luxurious apartment, not in the prestigious last name, but in Gabriel's arms, in the family they had built together. The following years were filled with precious moments. Helena taking her first steps, Gabriel recording everything on video, celebrating as if it were the greatest achievement in human history. Helena saying her first words. "Dada" was the first. Gabriel cried with emotion. Caroline graduated from engineering with honors. Gabriel was in the audience holding Helena in his lap, clapping louder than anyone when his wife's name was called. She got a job at a sustainable construction company, working on projects that made a real difference. Gabriel continued his therapeutic journey. He processed traumas, learned about emotions, and developed an emotional intelligence he never had. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, difficult. Days, moments when the old coldness tried to return, but Caroline was always there, reminding him that it was safe to feel. Helena grew up in a home completely different from the one Gabriel had. She was encouraged to express her emotions. When she cried, she was comforted. When she laughed, she was celebrated. When she was afraid, she was held. And she flourished. Henry lived long enough to see his great-granddaughter start to talk. On one of his last visits to the mansion, he held Helena on his lap and said, "You are loved, little one, never forget that. You are loved." Helena, at 2 years old, replied, "I know, Grandpa." It was one of the last conversations Henry had. He departed peacefully, knowing that the family would continue, but in a different way, healthier, more loving. At the funeral, Gabriel didn't cry with despair. He cried with acceptance. His grandfather had done the best he could with the tools he had, and in the end, he had tried to do better. Gabriel approached the casket, holding Helena in his arms. "Grandpa Henry is resting now," he explained to his daughter. "He lived a very long time, and in the end he learned that love is more important than anything." Caroline stood beside them, a hand on her husband's shoulder. They were a unit now, a real family. The years continued to pass. Helena started school. Gabriel made a point of taking her and picking her up personally, even with drivers available. He wanted those moments. He wanted to hear about her day, about her friends, about her discoveries. One afternoon, when Helena was 5, she asked, "Daddy, why do you always say you love me?" Gabriel stopped what he was doing and knelt down to her level. "Because you need to know. Every day you need to know that you are loved, that you are important, that your feelings matter." "But doesn't everyone know that?" "No, sweetie. Some people grow up without hearing that. And it hurts a lot. So I promised that you would always know." Helena hugged her father. "I know, Daddy, and I love you too." Gabriel hugged her tightly, his heart overflowing. "I know, my love, and that means everything to me." Caroline watched from the doorway, smiling. Gabriel had completely broken the cycle. Helena would grow up knowing she was loved, knowing that emotions were valid, knowing that vulnerability was strength. One night, 10 years after their original wedding, Gabriel and Caroline were alone. Helena was asleep. The house was quiet. They sat on the same couch where they had shared their first real kiss years ago. "Do you remember the contract?" Caroline asked. Gabriel laughed. "How could I forget? 43 pages of ridiculous clauses. I kept a copy. I wanted to reread it." "Why?" "Curiosity. I wanted to see how far we've come." They read it together, laughing at some clauses, shaking their heads at others. Appropriate emotional distance. Specific frequency of public appearances. Mathematical division of domestic responsibilities. "We failed miserably at following this," Caroline observed. "Thank God," Gabriel replied, "because emotional distance is the last thing I want with you." He took the document and ceremoniously tore it up. "We don't need this anymore, we never did." Caroline agreed. They had built something much stronger than any contract. They had built love. They had built trust. They had built a family. Gabriel pulled Caroline closer. "Thank you." "For what?" "For accepting that crazy contract, for giving me a chance, for teaching me how to feel, for building this life with me. Thank you, for being brave enough to let yourself change, for loving our daughter so deeply, for loving me when you didn't even know what love was." They kissed, not with the hesitation of the beginning, but with the certainty of a decade together. They had been through so much, pain, grief, transformation, growth, and they had emerged stronger. Years later, when Helena was a teenager, she asked how her parents met. Gabriel and Caroline exchanged a look, deciding to be honest. "It was an agreement," Gabriel began. "Your mother needed financial help. I needed to fulfill family expectations. We made a contract." Helena was shocked. "A contract like an arranged marriage?" "Sort of," Caroline admitted, "but something incredible happened. We learned to truly love each other. We chose to be together not because a piece of paper said so, but because we wanted to." "And you regret it?" Helena asked. "No, because it brought you here," Gabriel said. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and your mother." Helena processed that. "So love can start in any way, even from a contract?" "True love finds a way," Caroline said. "It doesn't matter how it starts. It matters how you choose to continue." Helena hugged her parents. "I love you guys." "We love you too, sweetie. Always." And it was in that moment that Gabriel realized he had succeeded. He had completely broken the destructive family cycle. Helena was growing up knowing she was loved, knowing how to express her emotions, knowing that vulnerability was allowed. Looking at Caroline, he whispered, "We did it." "Yes," she replied, "we did." Gabriel James Vaughanwood had learned the most important lesson of his life, that love cannot be bought, it cannot be contracted, it cannot be negotiated. Love is built, day after day, choice after choice, hug after hug. And Caroline Miller Vaughanwood had discovered that sometimes the best gifts come in unexpected packages. A cold contract had turned into the most beautiful love story she could ever imagine. Together they rewrote their stories, They didn't erase the past, but they created a different future, a future where contracts were just paper. What truly mattered was what they lived, what they felt, what they chose every day. Because in the end, what began as a business agreement transformed into true love. Not the perfect love of fairy tales, but real love. Imperfect, hard-won, earned, and they lived, not in perfection, but in fullness, with challenges and joys, with mistakes and successes, but always together, always choosing love, always free. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Gabriel and Caroline has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, of a man who learned to feel and a woman who taught the meaning of true love, please leave a like right now, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it when Gabriel held Caroline's hand for the first time? When he met little Helena? Or when he finally tore up that contract and chose love above all else? Every day, we bring intense and emotional stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's never too late to start over, to learn to love, and to break the patterns that imprison us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, where another moving story awaits you.